Hi guys, welcome back to another True Crime and Tea. Imagine being so in love with someone that you unalive them, but you keep their member as a memento. You keep it because you just want that person to still be with you. Yeah, the case that we're going to be looking at today, that is the case of Sada Abe. What happened in the case of Sada Abe was that she was so in love with a certain gentleman that she ended up being known for a very infamous crime that was committed in Japan in the 1930s. So this case, we have been to Japan before. So we've spoken about Miyuki Ishikawa, who was known as the demon midwife, who unalived hundreds of babies, and it wasn't really known as an infamous crime because at the time what she did wasn't necessarily looked down upon. It was, oh no, it's terrible, but she didn't even get a hefty sentence. She got like 8 years and only ended up serving 4. That is how much they didn't really see negativity in what she had done. So we've been in Japan before. We're back in Japan today with Sada Abe, who committed a very, very infamous crime. And there are going to be some disclaimers because I don't know how some of these topics may affect people, but there is topics on Lady of the Night work, and there is going to be some topics of unaliving lovers. So just to get that out there. Sada A was born in 1905, and it was known that her mother doted on her as the youngest child. She was the youngest of her siblings, and her mum basically just let her do what she wanted to do. Her father was known to be a very honest man, and what the mum had encouraged Sada to do was to take singing lessons, and in playing something called a shamisen. I don't know what a shamisen is. I'll put a picture of it here. Both activities which at the time were closely associated with geisha work, which they were more associated with that than like going into singing opera and stuff like that. Geishas were actually considered to be glamorous celebrities, and Sada herself followed the image of the geisha. She skipped school regularly to go and take the singing lessons and the playing of the instrument, and she would wear like very stylish clothes and makeup like the geishas would wear. And as time went on, you went to see that some of the problems that were present in the family were more to do with the siblings than they were to do with her actual parents. And as time went on, Sada became a bit more independent. She ended up becoming friends with a group of young people who were similarly as independent as she was. Now, at the age of 15, during one of their outings that they would regularly take, she was actually sexually assaulted by one of her acquaintances. And it surprised me that even though her parents supported her and they defended her, she became even more of a difficult teenager. And I kind of attribute this to the fact that her mum was very, very lenient with her, kind of let her get away with things, but also her brother and sister were not very good examples either. So it was kind of like the children were just left to their own devices. As much as the parents are being supportive of her, it doesn't surprise me that she turned out the way that she turned out. She became more irresponsible, more uncontrolled, and eventually this led the parents to sell her to a geisha house in Yokohama in 1922. So she would have been about 17 years old. This is where she thinks that she's gonna find her place in society, and she looked up to the geishas. We know from before, it was said that she kind of idolized them. They were the celebrities of the time. And it wasn't just Sada that wanted to be a geisha. Her sister Toku also wanted to be a geisha. So it seemed like that was their career path. That's where they thought they was going to end up. And Sada did end up being a geisha. However, she later said that she felt that she was sold by her father to the geisha house as a punishment. She didn't think that, it's almost like she didn't see the support of her parents in, you know, the situation that she had ended up in, and inevitably she was punished for her promiscuity by being sold into the geisha house. This ended up, I don't know if it's backfiring, but she ended up being classed as a lower level geisha, which meant even though she had learned how to sing, even though she had learned how to play this instrument, she inevitably became what would be the lady of the night work, but that was her role in the geisha house. So yeah, she basically, I don't think you could say the P word on here. That word, I don't think you can say that on here, but that's basically what she became in the geisha house. She was the one that would give those favors to the men, and this was mainly owing to the fact that she would have had needed to be an apprentice from early in her childhood, spending years studying arts and music, which would have allowed her to have a bit more of a higher ranking position, which she didn't. And for this reason, she ended up having, one of her main duties was to provide coitus to the men that visited the geisha house. So whilst she was working as a geisha, she actually ended up contracting syphilis, which meant that she needed to undergo regular examinations, which she would also have to do as a legally licensed, this word. So she felt that because that line of work, that lady of the night work, ended up giving her a better payout, the money was better, she decided that she was going to go down that route and leave the geisha house. In the early 1930s, Sada ended up working as a lady of the night in Osaka in their Tabita brothel district. So she became one of the regular ladies in the brothel houses, but she ended up getting a bit of a reputation as a troublemaker. Again, this goes back to her being somewhat of a troubled teen, somewhat of a problematic teenager, causing her parents a bit of a challenge. She was a challenge. So she brought this into her adult life and ended up being known as somewhat of a troublemaker in the brothel houses. And this was because she stole money from clients, and she attempted to leave the brothel a number of times. And I don't think that was accepted by those that were in charge. But because she kept on trying to escape, she was always tracked down by the fact that this is a very well organized, legal lady of the night work system. People are keeping tabs on their ladies, so they were connected enough to be able to track her down every single time she tried to escape, or not escape because she chose to be there. So every time she tried to leave the brothel house. And eventually, after about 2 years, she then did manage to leave one of these brothel houses and get out of the so-called legal lady of the night work system. And then she began working as a waitress. However, waitressing did not pay as well as lady of the night work, as she would soon discover. And because of this, she ended up going back into lady of the night work. So she still was doing the waitressing role, but she realized that she could double her money essentially if she continued to work as a lady of the night. However, this time she was unlicensed. She was basically her own boss. She didn't have to answer to anyone. She didn't have to get those regular examinations. She could just go off and do her own thing, which is what she did. And she began working as an unlicensed lady of the night in 1932. Sadly, her mother passed away in January of 1933. So Sada ended up going back to Tokyo to visit her father and her mother's grave. And when she went back to Tokyo, she ended up becoming a lady of the night back in Tokyo, because this was her profession. This was her line of work. This is what she was used to. And the money was good essentially at the time. But she didn't just become a lady of the night, she also became a mistress for the first time. Now, it seemed like being a mistress was the norm in those days. It was like if a man could afford to have a mistress, he would. And therefore, she became a mistress also. Sadly, again, a year later, January 1934, her father became seriously ill. And I wonder if it's like broken heart syndrome. You know, when people, they say when the partner dies, the one that's left doesn't really last much longer. I wonder if that's what happened with her father, because he got seriously ill to the point that 10 days after Sada had gone back to look after her father, he ended up passing away. Now both of her parents are gone. And then in October of 1934, she ends up getting arrested because she is an unlicensed lady of the night. So because she is undertaking this unlicensed lady of the night work, she's technically now breaking the law, because it's okay to do it if you've got a license, but apparently not if they're not making any money from it. But anyways, so she ended up getting arrested from the brothel that she was actually working in. Kinosuke Kasahara, I really hope I've said that right and not butchered that name, was a well-connected friend of the brothel owner, and they had arranged for her to be released. And this was partly due to the fact that he was actually attracted to Sada, and he found that she didn't have any debts, and because of his attraction to her, because she didn't come with any baggage, he then made an agreement with her for her to become his mistress. Kasara ends up taking on Sada as his mistress, and then in December of 1934, he provides her with money and he sets her up in a house. He gives her somewhere to live and he gives her money as his mistress. And when everything comes out after she commits the crime, in his deposition, he ends up saying that he remembered Sada to be really strong. He actually said she was really strong, a real powerful one. Even though I'm pretty jaded, she was enough to astound me. She wasn't satisfied unless we did it 2, 3, or 4 times a night. To her, it was unacceptable unless I had my hand on her private parts all night long. At first, it was great, but after a couple of weeks, I got a little exhausted. That's what he said. That actually makes me really laugh, because I'm immature and it's funny. That's what he ended up saying about Sada. Now, when Sada suggested to him that he should leave his wife and marry her, he obviously refused. She was his mistress. She was not going to be anything more than his mistress, and he wasn't willing to leave his wife for her. And so because he refused to leave his wife, she then asked him if she could take a lover for herself. Now, I don't see the double standard there. I'm your mistress, so technically I'm your lover. If you don't want to marry me, I want to go and get, not me, but she wants to go and, take a lover for herself. And he refused to allow her to take a lover because she was only allowed to be with him, apparently. It's very fair to say very quickly after that conversation, their relationship ended because neither were satisfied with that conversation going the way it went. And she ended up escaping him. That was the wording that was used, but I don't think that's fair wording. She left. And she went to stay in Nagoya. Now, funny enough, when he continued his testimony in court, when everything comes out in the end, he ended with a very, very angry remark about Sada. He said, she is a slut and a whore. And as what she has done makes clear, she is a woman who men should fear. It's fair to say he wasn't happy with her because she left him. But yeah, so that was Sada and Kasahara's relationship. It lasted for as long as it lasted, but he was also remembered in less than flattering ways for Sada, because she also said about him that he didn't love me and treated me like an animal. He was the kind of scum who would then plead with me when I said that we should break up. So after denying her request for a lover, apparently he pled with her for her to stay with him. And you know what? That, I'm not shocked by that statement. I think he probably did plead with her, because just the way some of these men acted around her, it doesn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if he did beg her not to leave him. But moving on, in Nagoya in 1935, Sada again was working as a lady of the night, but she wanted to get out of that line of work. So she ended up working as a maid at a restaurant. Funny enough, she didn't like working in a restaurant before because the money was rubbish, but now she's working as a maid, so maybe it's different. But in this restaurant that she worked in, she ended up getting into a relationship with a customer at this restaurant, and the customer's name was Goro Omiya. He was a professor and a banker who wanted to become very high up in Japan, in like the society of Japan. And now Sada, knowing that this restaurant that she currently worked in wouldn't tolerate their maid having sexual relations with their clients, and she was also a bit bored of staying in Nagoya, it didn't really do anything for her, she decided to return back to Tokyo, Japan in June of the same year. And Omiya met Sada in Tokyo, and he found out that she had syphilis, and he paid for her to stay in a hot springs resort in Kasatsu from November 1935 until January 1936. Now, why I find this interesting is because he would have known she had it while they were together. Why did he, like when she was back in Kaboya, why did he then decide to, I don't know, it was a bit weird, the timings of when he decided to pay for her treatment. But in the January of 1936, Omiya suggested that Sada should become financially independent so she can again be her own boss like she was when she was a non-licensed lady of the night. And he opened a small restaurant for her and recommended that she started working as an apprentice in the business, or in a business. This is where she then meets Kichizo Ishida, who was also a restaurant owner. She began working as an apprentice at Yoshidaya on February the 1st, 1936. And the owner of this establishment, Ishida, was 42 at the time. So he had worked his way up over the years, also starting as an apprentice at an eel restaurant, and then gradually opening up his own restaurant, Yoshidaya, which was in Tokyo's Nakano neighborhood. And he opened this restaurant in 1920. Now, when Sada joined him at this restaurant, he was known already to be a bit of a womanizer. So I think we can kind of guess where that's going, right? And because he was a womanizer and more focused on satisfying himself, he wasn't actually running the restaurant. He was known to not do much in terms of the actual management of the restaurant. The management of the restaurant, which his wife was doing while he was off gallivanting with women of the town. And it was well known that he was a womanizer. It wasn't a hidden fact. Now, not long after Sada began working at his restaurant, he then, being the womanizer that he was, began making advances to her. And Sada had never been physically satisfied by Omiya. So remember, Omiya's the guy she met back in Kabeya. So because Sada had never been satisfied by Omiya, she eventually gave in to Ishada's advances. In mid-April of the same year, Ishada and Sada initiated their relationship. So essentially they became lovers in the restaurant, and they actually did this inside the restaurant that Ishada was owner of. To what would be kind of ironic, there were geishas singing in the restaurant at the same time as them solidifying their relationship. On April the 23rd of 1936, they met for a pre-arranged lovers getaway, and this would take place at a tea house, which is essentially the equivalent of like a lover's hotel, and it was in the Shibuya neighborhood, and they only planned for it to be like a short fling. They didn't expect it was going to be something long term, it was going to go on forever. They actually remained in bed for 4 straight days. This is the kind of steamy romantic affair that they were having. And then on the night of the 27th of April, they moved from the first love hotel to another one in a further part of the neighborhood in Futako, Tamagawa. And here they just continued their love affair. They drank, they copulated, they had a good time, and sometimes they even included bringing geishas into the room where they would sing and entertain them essentially while they were doing their thing. They would continue to do what they were doing while maids would come in the room and serve them sake and things like that. It's like Sada just didn't care about her surroundings. Well, he didn't care either. They just didn't care about the surroundings. They just continued living the life and doing what they was doing whilst there was all this movement going on in the environment. So they continue this steamy love affair all the way to the 8th of May 1936, where it's known that Ishada did not return to the restaurant until this day. They were out from the 23rd of April all the way to the 8th of May. And Sada is known to say that she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was about Ishada or what was good about him, but she also said that it was impossible to say anything bad about his looks, his attitude, his skill as a lover. She found that he was very good at expressing his feelings, and she had never met a man who was, quote, such a sexy man. That's what she said. That was her opinion. After May the 8th, they had obviously gone their separate ways. They had jobs to do. They had business to run. Sada became somewhat agitated and at the fact that she didn't have her man with her. And then she started drinking excessively. And she claimed that Ishada was the love of her life. So being someone that was very promiscuous, she had seemingly found someone that she thought she could potentially settle down with, who she wanted to be with forever and ever. Amen. However, Ishada's married. Did we all forget that fact? Yes, Ishada is a married man, which meant that Sada was now very, very jealous of his wife, because essentially she had what she didn't, as in the wife had what Sada didn't. And just before the untoward events that are about to transpire, she started thinking about what she was going to do to Ishada. And a week before the homicide, she actually had considered carrying out this act. On the 9th of May 1936, it's known that Sada actually attended a play where a geisha attacks her lover with a large kitchen utensil. And then after seeing this is kind of when Sada threatens Ishada with a very similar kitchen utensil in their next meeting. So the next time they're together, she kind of reenacts what she saw at the play. And then on the 11th of May 1936, she pawned some of her clothes and used the money to buy some sushi and another sharp kitchen utensil. Now, it's said that when Sada actually confronted Ishada with the kitchen utensil, she had acted out this whole scene, and then she had kind of taken it out and then had said to him, I'll kill you for that, because obviously she had been upset about the fact that he was with someone else and she wanted him. She was almost reenacting what she had seen in the play and reenacting some of the words that were used in the play. And while Ishada was kind of taken aback and he did draw away from her and was a little bit startled, he was also seemingly quite delighted by this almost role play in his mind that Sada was doing. So I don't think it quite dawned on him what potentially was happening. I don't think he realized what was happening. Sada and Ishada returned to Ogu and they remained in Ogu until the incident. During their steamy moments, Sada took the kitchen utensil and put it next to his member, and she said that she would make sure that he would never play around with another woman again. He did not think this was serious. He actually laughed at the statement and thought that it was somewhat amusing. And then 2 days after that little, what he found to be funny incident, Sada started choking Ishada during one of their intimate moments. And instead of feeling fear and feeling scared and feeling like what on earth is going on, Ishada actually said that she should continue because it was a nice feeling to him, essentially. And they both did this to each other. So while the night is going on, she's not just choking him out, he's doing the same thing to her. Now, I would argue that this was all her manipulation of the next set of events that happens. However, she has claimed that that was just part of their intimacy play, and that even though she had been considering unaliving him, that didn't actually come to her thought at the time. However, on the evening of May the 16th, 1936, Sada used her obi sash to cut off Ishada's breathing during his pleasurable moments, and she said that they had both enjoyed this. Now, they kept on doing this over a couple of hours, and once Sada stopped using her sash for whatever she was using it for, she said that his face became a bit weird and it didn't turn back to its normal appearance. Then Ishada took 30 sedatives called calmotin to try and essentially get rid of the pain. So according to Sada, as Ishada started to doze off, he said to her, "You'll put the cord around my neck and squeeze it again while I'm sleeping, won't you?" And then she said that he said, "If you start to strangle me, don't stop because it is so painful afterwards." But Sada then commented that she wondered if he had intended for her to unalive him. But then on reflection, she had said that he must have been joking, because obviously who would want someone to do that to them, right? Then about 2 a.m. on the morning of the 18th of May 1936, as Ishada was asleep, Sada wrapped her sash twice around him and asphyxiated him to death. When she spoke to the police later, she said, "After I had killed Ishada, I felt totally at ease, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders, and I felt a sense of clarity." I don't even know how to feel about that statement. That's wild. And then Ishada didn't stop there. After a few hours of laying next to Ishada's body, because she didn't feel the need to get up, she just laid there, she then took the kitchen utensil and severed his member, wrapped it in a magazine cover, and kept them until her arrest. Now, it's actually known, she said to the police that she had put it in her bag. She'd put his member in her bag because she wanted to keep a piece of him with her, and she didn't just want to keep a piece of him with her. Trigger warning, because the next part is absolutely gruesome. She didn't just want to keep the piece of it with her, she tried to use it. Yeah, with Ishada's blood, she then wrote on Ishada's left thigh, Kichi Futari Kiri, which means Sada Kichi together. She wrote the same thing on a bedsheet, and then she carved Sada into his left arm. And then she put on his underwear and left the inn about 8 a.m, telling the staff to not disturb Ishada. Now, to me, that takes that is, I mean, there's loads of premeditation that's clearly gone on in this case. However, the fact that she then also goes on to tell the staff to not disturb him means that she's well and truly aware of what she's done, and she's given herself time to escape, to get away, because she knows the moment they go into that room, they are going to be met with one of the most gruesome scenes that anybody would avoid walking into. So there's very clearly premeditation here, and she said she premeditated it because she said she'd been thinking about it for a week before it happened. When she was asked why she had removed his member, his man bits, she replied, because I couldn't take his head or body with me. I wanted to take the part of him that brought back to me the most vivid memories. To explain that as the reason as to why she dismembered that particular part of his body is just wild to me. So after leaving the inn, she met Goro Emiya, the man who had introduced her to Ishada, and she repeatedly apologized to him. Obviously, he was unaware of what had happened, and so he just assumed that she was apologizing to him for having taken another lover. He didn't think that there could be any other reason that she would apologize other than the fact that she had ditched him to go and run off with Ishada. And that wasn't the reason she was apologizing. She was apologizing to him for what would become damage to his political career, because she knew that his association with her now being a murderess, would mean that it's going to have some knock-on effect to his political career. So that's actually why she was apologizing, not because she had taken another man. On May the 19th, 1936, the newspapers picked up the story, and I want to at some point talk about media sensationalism and how that has such a big impact on how we, the public, perceive these kind of people, because when you look into these cases, sometimes the media affect greatly the outcome of the situation, and the outcome of media interference in this particular case did cause ruin to Omiya, her previous lover. And now what that meant was her life, Sada's life, was now under intense scrutiny by the public from this point forward, and it meant that anybody that was associated with her would probably also be scrutinized. We know that there are loads of times where people come back and make up these untoward stories based on some nonsense they've read in a newspaper, well, not newspapers now, on some form of media outlet. So because this case now has become a national sensation, there is obviously frenzy over what was now called the Abe Sada panic, because at this point she hadn't been captured. So now it's, oh my goodness, what has this woman done? There's this big frenzy that has been created. And as time goes on, while she's obviously on the run, she's in hiding, there are various reports of her being sighted in different cities, and there was a false sighting of her in a city called Ginza, which nearly caused a stampede. There was a large traffic jam that had come off of the back of this, and I don't know if that's because people were just intrigued and they wanted to see this woman, or they were going to do something to her. But because of this publicity that had been created behind her, it had created this like really chaotic situation. May the 19th, Sada went shopping, watched a movie. On May the 20th, she had stayed in an inn called Shinagawa. She had gotten a massage, she drank a few bottles of beer, and she also spent the day writing farewell letters to Omiya, a friend, and Ishada. I mean, Ishada's gone, but she obviously felt the need to write him a farewell letter. And the assumption is, and what she has said, is that at this point she was planning to unalive herself. What she was going to do was play with the thing that she'd cut off, and then she was going to jump off a cliff or something like that. And she goes on to describe what she does with this. I mean, this is, you can find this on the internet, so I'm not going to read all of it on here because it's quite gross, but feel free to read it yourself if you would like to do so. But she goes in to talk about what she does with the member after a failed attempt at using this item. She then said that she was going to flee to Osaka, and then she was going to jump from a cliff on Mount Ikoma whilst holding it in her hand. That's what she eventually told the police. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. Whether she just kind of was adding to the nuance of this whole situation as to why she'd made up this story as to what she was going to do thereafter. But this is what she had kind of gone into detail as to what her plans were. However, at 4 p.m. on the same day, May the 20th, police detectives were a bit suspicious about an alias that they had seen when they had seen a registration for the room that Sada was actually staying in. And when they came to her room, she had said to them, "Don't be so formal." She said, "You're looking for Sada Abe, right? Well, that's me. I'm Sada Abe." So she didn't even bother running. At this point, I think she kind of realised that her time was up. She got arrested and she was just going to play by whatever rules was about to follow her. But actually, the police were not convinced that she was actually Sada, and it took her revealing Ishada's member for her to then be arrested. That was the proof she had to show that she was Sada. She was arrested and then interrogated over 8 different sessions, and the interrogating officer was said to have been struck by the demeanour of Sada when they asked her why she had unalived Ishada. And then he said that she had immediately become excited and her eyes sparkled in a strange way. There have been a couple of different takes about why Sada was different than some of the other cases, because she wasn't the only person that had unalived their lover at the time. And there have been a few that have tried to distinguish the differences between her case and the case of the others that were in Japan. And someone called William Johnston suggested that because she had said she killed not out of jealousy but out of love, that kind of defines what makes her different. But I would argue that a lot of the other cases you can look at, they probably were jealous that their lover was not predominantly theirs. So therefore, is that not also killing out of love? I don't know. I feel like that reasoning is kind of, it doesn't really make much sense. And then someone else called Mark Schreiber noted that the Sada Abe incident was captured at a time when Japanese media were so preoccupied with the extreme political and military troubles that the media, their sensationalization of this sex scandal served as somewhat of a relief from the political and military troubles that were having at the time. So because this story took away from that violence, and it was still violent, but because it was just surrounded by scandalous promiscuity and this woman who was a geisha and she was a legalized licensed night worker and all of that kind of stuff, that kind of distracted from all of the other things that were going on at the time. And I kind of agree with that. I think because this happened at a time when there was so much unrest, even though it was still kind of a taboo thing, the promiscuity that was going on, the geishas, the night workers, it still gave them something else to focus on that was more interesting than maybe the politics. Now, fun fact, after this incident and after everything has transpired, they did put Ishada's member on display at the Tokyo's University Medical School's Pathology Museum. However, after then, they were then put on public display a little bit after World War II. I'm assuming that the medical school's pathology museum wasn't public display, and then after that it was public display. But since then, it's actually disappeared. So maybe they just buried it. I don't know. Thinking about the trial, I won't go too much into the trial, but there was quite a bit of talk about the judge's comments about Sada, because the judge presiding over the case actually admitted to being sexually aroused by some of the details that were involved in this case. I think that's gross, because that to me doesn't really show professionalism. However, he admitted to it, so I don't know. But then he made sure to say that the trial was held with the utmost seriousness. Through the trial, that certain things came out in the trial, but inevitably on December the 21st, 1936, Sada was convicted of secondary homicide and mutilation of a corpse, because obviously she did what she did to his male bit. Though the prosecution demanded 10 years, Sada claimed that she desired to get the death penalty. She wasn't given the death penalty. She was actually given 6 years in prison, which I again think is wild. I don't understand how the prison system was working in Japan in those times. It's very, very strange. And I would argue that the fact that she was given such a lenient sentence, because that's a very lenient sentence for homicide, I would argue that maybe the judge wasn't taking it seriously. I don't know. It just doesn't, that doesn't equate to me. I wonder if it happened now, if she would be getting the same amount of time. Thinking all of that is bad, on the 10th of November 1940, her sentence was commuted because the 26,000th anniversary celebration of the mythical founder of Japan was being celebrated. So she was actually released exactly 5 years after she had committed the homicide on May the 17th, 1941. Let's think about the academic elements of this story. It's been interpreted by some as a critique of totalitarianism and oppressive political ideologies. When we look at this pre and post-war era, some will look at it and say that she was a symbol of freedom because she was almost liberated in some sense from the oppressive systems, because her actions, even though they were very extreme, were viewed as a form of rebellion, and it was a rebellion against societal norms and expectations of that time. She took on the role of the mistress and agreed to take on the role of the mistress. And when it was no longer serving her, she then did what she needed to do to get out. And actually, yes, she served 6 years in prison, or 5 years in prison, but did she actually get punished for her actions? Because when you look at the whole situation from the outside looking in, she had led this promiscuous life for however many years up until this point, 1936, so at least 20 years up until this point. She didn't really seem to fit into what societal norms were. She at one point was working as a legalized night worker, and then she thought, this isn't for me, I'm going to make my own money, and just decided to go on her own. So she does kind of represent freeness in a society where there was so much supposed oppression at the time. And then when you look at this decades later, you see how she almost kind of leaves a legacy, and how people continue to draw on this story, and how it created so much public interest, because this particular story has been the subject of books, films, and academic studies, each offering their own perspectives on her life and her actions, because you have to start from the beginning. Yes, she came from a loving two-parent household, but the loving two-parent household that she came from, her mum let her get away with everything and anything. So was that part of the reason as to why she felt that she could do to Ishada what she did and not necessarily pay a hefty fine for it, so to speak. Essentially, they say that she killed out of love and not jealousy. However, we know that she was jealous of Ishada's wife because Ishada's wife had the man that she thought was the love of her life. The mum raised her to basically get what she wanted. She could have what she wanted. And yes, I know, again, they sold her to a geisha house. However, there is some element of me that feels like the parents knew that's what she essentially wanted to do anyway. Also, the sister had made it very clear that's what she wanted to do. Sada had shown them that's what she wanted to do. She used to dress up as a geisha. She learned how to sing. She learned how to play the instruments. So there are so many different perspectives that we can look at that can say, was she created into this person based off of the kind of upbringing that she had? And actually, maybe it has absolutely nothing to do with her promiscuity and more to do with the fact that she was raised with a sense of almost not superiority, but what she wants she gets. And I would say that the fascination with her story, it kind of serves as a reminder of the complex relationship between individual actions and the broader societal context in which they occur. There are lots of things that we could talk about when it comes to the Sada case. Inevitably, we could say that her actions can be seen as an extreme form of existential rebellion against societal norms and expectations. Now, I did want to talk about the involvement of the judge and his lack of professionalism, but I want you to let me know in the comments, what do you think the legal and ethical elements are raised in terms of the judge making the statements that he did about becoming aroused when he heard the story? Because I personally think that's completely outlandish, but that's not an objective view. There may be other reasons and other things that you can go into when you're talking about the legal side of it, and questions raised about impartiality and whether the case was actually fairly concluded. But please let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, guys, I will leave it there. I will see you in the next video. If you like content like this, like I said, do not forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you know when I release a video. I am here every Wednesday and I will see you next week. Bye. And it was in the Shibuya on Ishada's left thigh. Sorry, this woman is wild. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. I shouldn't laugh. Are you hearing this? I'm not laughing because it's funny. I laugh in awkward situations, and I feel really awkward right now because I feel like I don't understand why anyone would do any of this, but